Miraculous, simply the best. Up to hey there, it's Winter Iceheart. I'm here to help you with how to correctly rig ice. In the previous video we covered how to draw and separate the ice into layers, so today we'll go over how to rig them without any issues. Let's get started! Oh god, it seems like we heard. This video is perfect for beginners who may not have any experience with Live2D Cubism. It covers the basics of rigging ice and includes all the necessary tools for creating a complete Live2D model. So let's get started and move on to Live2D Cubism editor. From the previous video you learned that this program can only open images with the PSD extension. Let's do it. Open the file menu, click on open and select our PSD file. Here, the program will offer you a resolution for displaying the model image. Choose the resolution based on the power of your PC or laptop. During the work process, you can always change it, and it will not affect the result. After opening, we see something slightly different from what we drew before. This is because the clipping configured in the graphics editor is not saved. Let's set it up again. But first, let's take a look at the ID field in the inspector palette. Yes, when importing a model, the program assigns a unique identifier to each layer, following certain rules. I will now explain them and you can see them on the screen. First, the ID can only consist of letters, numbers and underscores. The maximum length of the ID is no more than 63 characters. And the first character must not be a number. First, Live2D Cubism wants to assign the ID field the same value as in the name field, which is the name of our layer. However, if it detects any spaces or special characters in the layer name, it generates a new ID for the layer, which will be named arcmesh plus number. It's that simple. There are also cases where we have two or more layers with the same name that comply with the rules. In that case, the program will copy all those names into the ID field, but add a unique number to each one. I struggled for a while to come up with consistent naming convention for IDs, and in the end I settled on a few points. The template for objects IDs, major name, site, minor name. For example, IL pupil. For folders IDs, add folder in the end. And capitalize each word. Please note that sites should be mirrored. So, if the arrow in the name points to the right, the ID should have the left side. Now let's take a look at the clipping ID field and proceed with layer clipping. Select the element you're interested in, for example Fur Layer 1. In the clipping ID field you need to specify the ID of the element to which the clipping will be applied. In version 4.2 a drop-down list was introduced, making it easier to find the desired object. However, if you adhere to the ID naming rules, it won't be difficult for you to manually enter the correct ID. Choose Fur Basic and you'll see how Fur Layer 1 only clips to the Fur Basic layer. You can also click on one layer, hold Shift, click on a layer below and instantly clip multiple objects. Now let's finally put it into practice. Hide the layers that are in your way, find the folders with the I elements, assign them IDs and clip the iris, pupil and highlights to the sclera. Also, if you have shadows in front of the sclera, clip them to it as well. I'm glad to see those who made it here without fast forwarding. Something interesting begins here, mesh overlaying on layers. For example, let's take right upper eyelashes. Switch to solo mode to make it more visible and hide the bounding box. Now look at these four vertices and the slightly noticeable diagonal. They form two triangular polygons, and all of this is called a mesh. When importing a model, the program creates such a rectangular mesh for all layers. We, in turn, will erase it and create something cooler. I'll show you how I create a mesh, and after some practice you can decide which method is more convenient for you. I follow this principle. If you can save time and create a mesh automatically, it's better to do so. I select the layer, click on this button in the toolbar, choose a standard preset and adjust the settings to have an adequate number of polygons. Then, when the mesh is formed, I click here and refine it to my satisfaction. If there are too few polygons, there is a high chance of creating jagged movements. Let me show you a couple more useful tools. Stroke Mesh Mapping allows you to draw a line for which a beautiful mesh will be created later, and you can customize this mesh. Add points. Click or drag the mouse where you want to add more vertices, and they will appear and connect to adjacent ones. Here we go, finally! We are about to begin rigging and giving movement to the eyes, you might think, but no. Now let's take a look at the parameter palette. Here default parameters are listed. These are sliders that control how our objects move in the view area. Let's create two folders, one for eye parameters and another for everything else, to keep things organized. We will be working with these 6 parameters. Now let's get started with the transformations. We'll be using a special tool called the Wrap Deformer, and we'll begin with the movements of the eyeball. A bit of anatomy. The eyeball consists of the sclera, the white part, the iris and the pupil. The iris and pupil are located beneath the cornea. The eye muscles pull the eyeball back from different sides, causing movement. Therefore, to show eye movement, we need to combine the iris, pupil and highlights into a single object. For this, we need a deformer. However, if your highlights are drawn on the sclera, you don't need to include them in the same deformer. Let's now select the objects we mentioned earlier. Click right here, give the deformer a suitable name and create it. Now, if you move our deformer, you'll see that all the elements of the eyeball move along with it. Let's say we want to move a pupil along the x-axis. To do this, select our deformer, click on the corresponding parameter, then click here to create 3 keyforms. These are points that will indicate the key positions of the deformer. Right now, it's in the center, and we want to move it to the left. Right-click on the left keyform to focus precisely on that point and start moving the deformer. Try to keep everything anatomically correct and avoid moving the pupil beyond the eyelashes. Do the same with the right keyform. I believe you can guess that for moving the deformer along the y-axis, we need to repeat the same steps, but this time with the eyeball y parameter. For all y-axis, the left keyform is the bottom and the right one is the top. So, we've managed to create movement for the eye along the x and y axis. But how will we do circular movements? Look here. On the left side of each parameter, there is a small paper clip icon. It allows you to attach to the lower parameter, giving us a visual representation of all possible deformer positions. Ensure that the movement from one vertex to another is smooth, without abrupt deviations from the trajectory. Well, we are done with the eyeball, but let's bring it to life even more. And once again, a bit of anatomy. The cornea, under which the iris and pupil is transparent and convex. Now, using separate movements of the highlights, we'll show this convexity and volume. Let's create deformers for the highlights and for the pupil with the iris. Attach them to the parameters we already know, eyeball X and eyeball Y, and with some delicate movements, we'll slightly narrow the pupil at the edges near the eyelashes. Now let's do the same with the highlights, but here we'll give volume to the cornea, making it convex. See how I'm doing it? You'll notice that in some positions the highlights overlap the pupil, creating a volumetric effect and making the eyes look more lifelike. Alright, we're done with eye movement. Now let's focus on closing them. Here we'll use something different from a deformer. We have the Deform Path Edit tool. Let's click on the upper eyelashes and use this tool. We'll place 6 points along the eyelashes. Select the IR open parameter, remembering that this is the right eye, not the left. So we'll have 5 keyforms here. To begin with, right-click on the parameter, select Edit Parameter and increase the maximum value of the parameter to 1.5. Then click right here and set the necessary values 1.2, 1.5, 0, 0.3 and 0.85. Our starting position will be at point 1.2. At point 0.85, we only slightly lower the eyelid. What's between point 0.85 and 1.2 we call the buffer. It's necessary so that when capturing movements, our eyes are open rather than halfway closed. This happens because the camera doesn't always detect our full eye opening. Let's fully select our eye and activate solo mode on it. As I mentioned earlier, we skip point 0.85 and go straight to 0.5. We lower the eyelashes halfway and slightly narrow them. Then we do the same for point 0. To avoid starting from the initial state each time, we can use the Ctrl-Shift-C and Ctrl-Shift-V keyboard shortcuts to copy the layer's position from keyforms and then paste it into another point. Now let's start narrowing the side eyelashes. It's the same principle. Place points along the layer, right-click on each point of a parameter and click on this green button to attach our layer to the point. I wasn't satisfied with how angular the side eyelashes looked when compressed, so to fix this I added more points to the mesh. The next step is to change the position of the lower eyelashes. Here you can take a look at the intermediate result of what we've achieved so far. This is how blinking looks without compressing the sclera, iris and pupil. Next, we just need to compress the sclera using the same points of a parameter. You can include it in the deformer or you can work with a mesh. I'll do it with a mesh. Sometimes it's difficult to see the boundaries of a sclera, so I recommend enabling solo mode for its rigging. We can also press the B key, select a specific art mesh and shift it as needed. Note that this trick works only when the mesh is precisely linked to the parameter. In other words, if you move the deformer, the mesh changes won't be linked to the point. And here's how our eye blink looks. I think it looks beautiful, but that's not all. We still have point 1.5 left. It's a surprise expression. Here we widen our eyelids and slightly narrow the iris. All of this is done with the tools we've already learned. I'm sure you'll handle it easily. Here we create a deformer for our pupil and iris to make them slightly narrower when surprised. Look at what else we can do. In the same deformer, when closing the eyelids, we can make the iris also move downwards when the eye is closed. As I mentioned earlier, these small details make our model more lifelike. Now let's see what we've achieved. Next, we use the IR smile parameter to change the shape of our eye when smiling. There is nothing complicated here. We only need two keyforms for turning it on and off, so when we smile, the parameter value will be set to 1. Let's attach all the eyelashes and sclera to this parameter and configure it for each point of the IR open parameter. The final step in rigging the eyes is to mirror all the settings from one eye to the other. Select all the eye layers and deformers we worked with, copy them and paste them, remove the top deformer, we don't need it. Select all the new objects, right-click on what we just pasted, and click Reflect. Leave Reflect horizontally checked, and in the Reflect parameters list, choose only eyeball X. Now move our new objects into the eye folder. There are two options here. If both eyes are identical 100%, you just need to delete all the layers of the old eye. But if there are differences, you'll have to rig those layers from scratch. However, there are workarounds. For example, my iris and pupil look different. I put them in a deformer that was copied, and now it can move them. I rename the objects, set up proper clipping, and all that's left is to apply a new mesh to the iris and pupil. I do this as usual, automatically set up the mesh on all layers and add new vertices. And now we just need to ensure that the parameters for the right eye only affect the right eye, and the parameters for the left eye only affect the left eye. To do this, we select all the objects of our right eye, right-click on the point next to the IR open parameter, and in the drop-down menu, choose Change. We change them to IL open. We do the same for the IR smile parameter. Now we can see that the IL open parameter only affects the left eye and the IR open parameter only affects the right. To check our results, we can go to the modeling menu and open Physics Scene Blending Settings. It seems something happened with my camera, so I'll be static. Thank you all for watching. I hope this video was helpful and you learned something new. Make sure to put it into practice. In the meantime, subscribe to the channel and look forward to new videos. Thanks everyone. Bye bye.